So now we are moving to the fourth panel, named Shareholder Value Creation in State-Owned Enterprises, which will include such topics like the state acting as an owner, who is the real shareholder, transparent nomination of the board and the management, empowering the board of state-owned enterprise, mandate or responsibility, and how should the state communicate to the state-owned enterprise board, its objectives and expectations. And I would like to invite Anders Berg, the chair of the Working Party of the State Ownership and Privatization Practice, OECD, director in the Ownership Department, Norwegian Minister of Trade and Industry, to give introductory statements. And then afterwards, my colleague from the Baltic Institute of Corporate Governance, the chairman of the board, Daiga Auziņa-Melalksne, will be chairing the panel. Thank you. So, Anders, please.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Okay, I can use this one then. Dear fellow panelists and conference participants, before I start, I would also like to commend the organizers and for an interesting and well-organized conference. And it gives me great pleasure to be here to participate at the conference. I am here in the capacity as chair of the OECD's Working Party on State Ownership and Privatization Practices. And I plan to shed some light on the OECD's perspective on some aspects of shareholder value creation in state-owned enterprises. I'd just like to say some few words about the Working Party, since some of you may not know about it. The Working Party has three main tasks. Firstly, it's a forum for exchange of relevant information among SOE practitioners from OECD countries, but also in a larger extent than before, including non-OECD members. Lithuania, for example, is a regular participant at the meetings. Secondly, it's a standard-setting body developing good practice and overseeing implementation of the OECD guidelines on corporate governance of state-owned enterprises. The guidelines are actually up for revision now, starting at the next Working Party meeting later in October. The roadmap for revision plans for the process to be concluded by 2015. This work will be done in parallel to the work on OECD's corporate governance principles. And the third task is to act as a source of practical advice to countries who seek expertise of other countries. Before I just jump into the details that's on this agenda, I would like to draw your attention to that focus on proper and professional corporate governance of state-owned enterprises has in the later years risen on the international arena. And the main reason for this is the size and the relevance of the sector. A recent OECD study showed that of the 2,000 largest companies in the world, 204 of them have significant government ownership. What is more, these companies tend to be concentrated in strategic sectors such as infrastructure, communication, and finance that are crucial to the productivity and efficiency of national economies. That makes it quite interesting. If you look at the Nordic region and you take the 40 largest companies in the Nordic region, 22.5% of them have direct state ownership. This just underlines the need for proper and professional corporate governance of SOEs. And my experience is that is a universal issue which governments all over the world acknowledge. This panel is to discuss value creation in SOEs along four issues: the state acting as an owner, board nomination, the role of the board, and communication between the board and the owner. They are issues that are all addressed in the OECD guidelines for corporate governance of state-owned enterprises, which were established in 2005. So, if you look at the first topic, the state acting as an owner, it is of key importance and is emphasized in the guidelines chapter 2. Important issues in the guidelines that I would like to highlight here is 4. Firstly, it's important to establish an ownership policy and defining objectives for the SOEs. The point here is that this can be done in many ways. It could be done in presenting the objectives to the Parliament in a white paper. It can be presented in the government's annual report. It can be presented in a letter to the companies. The point is making the government's policy and objectives publicly available is important. It is important. The second issue is to establish a clear division of roles between the SOE and the owner, the state. In most OECD countries and most countries in general, this is regulated by company law, but in many countries it's not. That's why this is an important issue. The third issue is that the owner should exercise its ownership rights according to the legal structure of each company, meaning for all practical reasons that the owner does its governance at the general meeting and leave the management of the SOE to the board and the management. If this is done right, it will contribute to strengthening the legitimacy of state ownership, and it also will enhance values. When you look at the state acting as an owner, the fourth topic I want to just point at, which is assessed to be important when discussing the state as an owner, is transparency and disclosure. This is described in the OECD guidelines in Chapter 5. 2 points which are important in this regard. One is to support aggregate reporting of the SOE portfolio. This is something we in the Nordic region have a focus on, but also countries as New Zealand, UK, France, and I think also here in Lithuania have focus on this. That will increase public insight into the governance, the government's corporate governance, and that will increase the legitimacy of state ownership. Another important is to ensure that SOEs themselves report and disclose information in accordance with relevant national legislation, and that they are subject to the same standards as privately owned companies. That's normal practice in most OECD countries. I would just like to draw your attention to a paper called Accountability and Transparency, a Guide of State Ownership, published in 2010 by the OECD, which addresses some of these issues that I have raised here. Now, I just want to focus on issues related to the board of directors. We are going to discuss nomination, the role and the responsibility of the board, and communication. Board of directors play a fundamental role in corporate stewardship and performance of companies. Many OECD, but also non-OECD countries have sought to further professionalize boards of SOEs, ensure independence and shield them from ad hoc political intervention. The aim of the OECD guidelines in this respect is, of course, to support such development, and even if there has been a lot of improvement in many countries, there's still a way to go. I would therefore like to draw your attention to a report which the Working Party published earlier this year. The report gives an overview of national practices on board of directors in SOEs in over 30 countries. Both OECD and non-OECD countries have participated, and the aim with the report is to give practical guidance on issues related to board of directors, through pointing at what the Working Party views as good practice. It is important when you look at the report that some practices may not be applicable everywhere, but are indicators on what works and at the same time is in accordance with the guidelines. The report takes for 7 different topics, ranging from the role of directors to boardroom efficiency. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just focus on the topic we have today. If one looks into nomination processes, the report highlights that a transparent nomination process is one of the primary responsibilities of the state. What does that mean in practice? That could mean a lot of things, but I would like to point at 2. Coordination of board appointments in governments is important. When having a diversified ownership structure, and I think most countries have that, that means that the ownership is divided between several ministries. It is important to coordinate board appointments. Good practice indicates that it is important to secure some sort of consensus as a whole in the government. Examples are Sweden and Norway, where nominations in all or in most important SOEs are made in agreement with the whole of the cabinet. The other issue I want to point at when looking at nomination is establishing a transparent and consistent method of identifying board candidates. It is very important to secure the right competence to the board of directors, especially in SOEs. And there are many ways to do that. The report points at 3 different practices which are all in accordance with OECD standards. You have one way of looking at it, it's formal qualification requirements. That means there are legal requirements to be met. Good examples are Israel and Portugal. In Israel, for example, it is required that nominees meet legal requirements set out in the company law, and they're actually interviewed and tested on those requirements before they are nominated. Then you have a model with formal nomination committees. It's often used in listed companies, where you have in the bylaws a regulation on nomination committees. The state is often have a representative in the nomination committee together with private owners. The third and maybe the most normal process is what the report calls informal processes to advise the ministerial appointees. And that can be anything. That could be from just an internal process where the minister appoints a minister to somewhere in between where you have internal processes, but they use kind of the format of the nomination committees, to the extreme on the other hand, like in New Zealand, where you have a totally open process where the candidates have to nominate themselves on websites, and then they have the recruitment process internally before it ends as a ministerial appointee. There's one issue I just want to raise on, which is not in the report, it's not in the guidelines, and that's politicians sitting on boards, which there is some practices, different practices in different countries. And the OECD does not have an official view on it, but I think the major, or most of the countries are practicing that active politicians do not sit on boards. Okay, moving on. The third topic in the report, which I want to touch upon, is the role of the board. What is responsibility and the mandate? And I think when discussing this issue, it is important to remember that the OECD guidelines clearly states that the state as an owner should let the board exercise its responsibilities and its independence. In the report, it is the focus there is the question of conformance versus performance. Conformance in this context refers to the fact that boards on SOEs may view their role as acting in accordance with directives and rules of the owner instead of focusing on corporate performance. Good practice is in an OECD context that the board should focus on corporate performance and helping the management on strategic issues. The state as well can assist in this matter. That could be done by making the objectives and priorities clear through proper channels, giving the board the responsibility for hiring the CEO will also contribute to strengthening the independence of the board. There are examples where owners appoint the CEO directly, and that can lead to CEOs which report directly to the owner, and with that bypassing the board. The report points at such practice as worst-case examples. The report is available at the OECD. I highly recommend it for inspiration to improve how one can improve work in the board of directors. The fourth issue we're going to discuss is communication between the board and the state as an owner. The guidelines does not address this issue directly, and it's not in the report as well. But of course, topics touched upon earlier in my introduction is also relevant here. From my perspective, it is important to be able to have an open dialogue with the board and the management as an owner. If the company is listed, that is normal behavior for the company to meet with investors, including the state. The important issue is that the company treat all shareholders equally, and that the state, which usually is the dominant shareholder, is not given favorable treatment. If it is a wholly owned company, there may be reasons for the board wanting a closer dialogue with its owner or vice versa. But I would like to point at the risk of reducing the board's sense of independence and responsibility if it in practice seeks acknowledgement for decisions with its owner, which formally lies with the board. And I think that kind of concludes my introduction. Thank you for your attention, and I hope that my introduction has given some perspective on how the OECD views these issues. Thank you. Yeah. Yes, thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am very happy to see so many of you here, because it always presents a challenge to be the last panel, on the last panel, and also after lunch. So thank you all for coming and joining us today for this panel. I will start with introducing you to the panel members. Thank you, Anders, for your remarks. Let me remind you that Anders Berg is Director of Ownership Department at Ministry of Trade and Industry in Norway. And Ownership Department is responsible for exercising the government's ownership in 21 listed and non-listed commercial companies. And like mentioned already, Anders is Head of Corporate Governance Unit. He has worked in Ownership Department since 2002. And also, he is the chair of OECD's Working Party on State Ownership and Privatization Practices. On panel, we also have Patrick Magee. Patrick Magee is Executive Director for Shareholder Executive, Department for Business, Innovation and Skills of United Kingdom. And Patrick has joined Shareholders Executive in 2012. And before joining Shareholder Executive, Patrick was a Managing Director of Corporate Finance at JP Morgan Cazenova. And during his career, he has advised on a broad range of M&A deals, capital markets, and corporate broking assignments for large clients in different industries. We also on a panel have Dalius Misunas, who is the chairman of the board and CEO of Lietuvos Energia, so state-owned company. It is a national utility group that includes electricity generation, distribution, supply, and services. And Dalius is also a member of board of directors at Euroelectric, president of National Lithuanian Electricity Association. On panel, we also have a representative from Estonia, Erki Rasuke, who is a member of Corporate Governance Council of Baltic Institute of Corporate Governance. Erki has served as a counselor to the Minister of Economy. He was invited to help ministry with different state ownership issues, including ownership policy, corporate governance, and strategic choices. His first assignments included Estonian road administration, and also he is a chairman of Supervisory Council of Estonian Air. And all of us from Baltics know Erki as from his previous experience in Baltic and Nordic banking sector. Erki has been a chief financial officer of Swedbank Group and also a member of Swedbank Group's executive committee. And we have one more representative on our panel, and it's Tapani Varjas, who is General Counsel of Solidium OY. Solidium is a state-owned holding company managing non-strategic listed equity portfolio on behalf of State of Finland. And Solidium is an active minority shareholder aiming to enhance shareholder value creation through active engagement. Currently under Solidium's management are 11 companies who totals in approximately 7.5 billion euro. And Tapani is also a member of the directors of Institute of Finland. So as you see, we have a very experienced panel today. And we'll start our panel discussion with a presentation from Tapani. He will give a brief overview of Finnish experience and Solidium view on shareholder creation, value creation in state-owned enterprises. So, Tapani, please. Thanks. Yeah, remote is here.
No? Okay. First of all, I would like to, on my behalf, thank the organizers for having me speaking here. It's a great honor to be part of this event. I will very quickly run through Solidium's case, the structure that we have established in Finland for about 4 years ago. Our task is to manage 11 listed companies which are minority holdings for the state of Finland. So if you have a look at the state ownership in Finland, we have still several companies which are owned by the state. Some of them are special assignment companies. Most of them are sort of commercial interest companies. Out of these commercial interest companies, of course, a listed company with a minority holding, that's a sort of at the one end of the spectrum. So the state's interest in such companies should be purely financial interest. Who is the owner of these 11 listed companies that Solidium manages? We say that it is Solidium. The whole purpose of Solidium structure is to create insulation between political discussion and decision making and economical decision making. To ensure that the empowerment and the real ownership stays within Solidium, the best way to do is to have a strong enough board which consists of some of the most distinguished businessmen and women in Finland, which clearly have the authority to exercise the mandate in its full. So there is I think there is a need to have a political discussion on political forums, but the management of these companies and the ownership of these companies stays within Solidium. Of course, we don't like to be surprised by our portfolio companies, and thus we don't want to surprise our owner. So there is a communication between the board and the owner, the state of Finland, the ownership steering, but the decision-making powers are within the board of Solidium. So what is the mandate that the board exercises in full? It's a purely financial mandate. There is some sort of national element on issue. What are the companies that we own? Again, there is a financial element. The companies that we own must be able to create shareholder value, but we have a limited amount of capital available to us, so we carefully analyze which are the companies that there would be a need for an owner like us to be involved in. How do we get shareholder value? We require excellent management and leadership and excellent board work. Our strategy in selecting board members is quite simple. We want to have the best possible boards in all of our companies to create most shareholder value in the long term. We don't, this is a terrible term to use in a corporate governance seminar, own members in a board. I mean, of course, that we don't have any members that are non-independent from Solidium. We elect best possible boards, teams for each of our portfolio companies. It is the key process for us is the electing of the best teams for our board, for our portfolio companies. And we have spent quite a bit of time trying to refine that process to be as good as possible. In that process, our tool is nomination board. Nomination board is a board which usually consists of 3 or 4 large shareholders and the chairman of the board. The chairman's role in the process is crucial. It's fairly easy to identify from outside the competencies that are required, taking into account the strategy of the portfolio companies. What are the competencies needed for the board? But it's very difficult to be able to assess how the board works and how the team works and how different people contribute. So the role of a chairman in that process is absolutely crucial. In addition, the chairman can be seen as representing the board and the other shareholders. If you have a structure like this, it's crucial that you have a transparency in the nomination board's work. And in every AGM, the chairman of the nomination board will give an extensive presentation on issues that the nomination board has dealt with. What are the requirements? Why have we chosen to select these particular individuals? Why are we choosing to increase the salary of the board members or not to increase it, and so on and so on. And I think that's additional transparency, at least in Finland, compared to nomination committees, which are consisting of the board members themselves. So we added a bit of a transparency on that respect. And at the end of the day, we hope to have world-class boards in each of our portfolio companies. But maybe that goal is not achievable, and it's not even the right goal in a sort of a smaller companies, which we have also in our portfolio.
Just in terms of what the Shareholder Executive is, many parallels with our colleagues from Finland. Shareholder Executive is an in-house corporate finance, corporate governance expert team. We're about 60 people managing 20 SOEs. Most of them are 100% owned. We have energy assets, companies house, TV stations, air traffic control systems, so lots of important assets. But what we have done, the model that we have developed, again, bringing the commercial authority in, as in Finland, is to bring in, of the team of 60 people who work day to day, about half of those have come in from the private sector. So people like me have come from banking, advising on corporate governance issues for a long period of time. And therefore we really do get traction with the politicians and senior policy officials and how's the best way to run the corporate governance. We also get involved in privatizations. Royal Mail's coming this Friday, so it's the biggest privatization we've done in 20 years. So if you have this sort of specific ownership and corporate governance function that is defined by policy and adheres with the principles that Anders talked about, if you have that specialized expertise within government, I think it really does help in managing those SOEs.
One of the themes that is also for today's discussion is the transparent nomination of the board and the management. And we know that a few years ago there was excellent experience here in Lithuania, but there were quite a few independent board members nominated in largest Lithuanian companies, state-owned companies. Unfortunately, this practice, to my knowledge, has been discontinued. But Darius, you are the CEO of and also chairman of the board of Lithuanian energy company. What is your view on this, and what is your perspective?
Okay, so I would just react. I don't think it has been discontinued.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, and I hope it has not been discontinued. It's very important to have professionals from outside on the boards. I myself am coming from the group of companies that has just recently established a two-tier system in the management, where I myself am a chairman of the management board, and we have also a supervisory board that consists of representatives of the government and also independent board members. Just for example, 7 board members total, 4 are representing different ministries and the Prime Minister's office, and 3 are independent. So I think we are working on that practice, and from what I have heard, I think we have a pilot case or a test drive of this SOE management system in our group on a small scale, because the group is only 12 companies and all related. However, we have tried to establish many good practice rules within our group, such as division of the supervision role and management role, such as transparent selection of board members and management, key management positions by the help of the nomination committee that is serving the supervisory board. I think another good thing here is that we have a representation of 3 different ministries on our supervisory board, and also a Prime Minister office, which is, I think, helps a lot when you try to avoid this division between the ministries with their power, having different companies to play with. Of course, this is only done on the scale of the group, of one group of companies, and we still have a long way to go on roll-outing this or implementing this on the state level. But I think the first steps are good, and just briefly answering to your question, I think the practice that has been implemented with the independent people on the board was really good, and I think we are keeping to that.
Okay. You also mentioned that you have representatives from different ministries and also Prime Minister's office on your board. I mean, it would probably be not considered a good practice, you know, if we look at OECD guidelines. This would be something that the best practice would be to trying to avoid it. So I'm wondering what are the views on that? How can we keep politicians away from SOE's management, or you know, Erkki, you maybe.
Again, I can only draw onto the tiny Estonian example, and it's probably quite enough if I find some new enemies from there in this topic. Yes, yes. Board composition also what we looked, and it's one shouldn't generalize. I mean, the sample what we had was from side to side. It was very easy to form the new board for Estonian Air because it was company losing 5 million euros per month. And you can be sure is that yes, is that no politician want to be gone to the 10 kilometers of that. So that one was very smooth. But now looking to the again Estonian case, basically what we have seen is three types of members. Very typically kind of state officials. Very often ministry is putting somebody there basically for making the information is changed and then moved, etc. And they're typically kind of area professionals, so no big harm there. Then active politicians, yes, and that is a debatable. Should the active parliamentarian who is actually making the laws really sit in the boards of the company? And then we have a third one, which is fairly overwhelming, is that basically people from the private sector. But I would say is that out of these three, the people from the private sector have actually been the most problematic ones. Because what you can see is a very high correlation of the very same people as being political donors or sponsors, and then basically as a byproduct of this transaction, they also getting involved into the boards. So I would, yeah, I think that it's popular to talk about politicians in the board, but I would say, I mean, if we start really from the top of the issues, is that I would actually go and challenge mostly these private sector representatives, because I think in a short run that they actually are making a bigger negative influence than anybody else.
Okay, Anders, please.
Just think I want to comment, and at least from OECD, what one is afraid of, if in regards to politicians on board, is that you will have political interference in the running of the company, and of course, if you have a active politician on the board, it's much closer to the company if you're not on the board. But said that, I think it's also legitimate to discuss what type of competence is necessary on a board of directors. And if you have at least a SOE, which is more of a sector company than a commercial company, it is not legitimate to say that to have a person with political experience, for example, a former politician on the board, that could be very useful for the SOE. So there are, different sides. But in Norway, for example, we do not have active politicians, state secretaries, or members from the civil service on boards. Said that, we do in our ownership policy state that people with political experience could be a value asset to a board of directors. So it's just how it's seen. I think you see, if you look at OECD countries, you will see that you have long-running or countries that have been in OECD for a long time that have politicians directly on the boards. But I think when we revise the guidelines, I would not be surprised that something about politicians on the boards will be stated there. I also just wanted to comment a bit on the Norwegian practice on nomination committees, because this is, if you look on nominating boards in private sector worldwide, I think this is maybe one of the sectors where owners like ourselves have actually come quite far. We look at this as an all-year process. We work quite systematically on our boards. Both are listed and are non-listed. And there's 4 important issues. It's the company's needs, it's aggregate competence there, it's the board's individual competence, and it's how they work together. And then we work quite systematically to put together the best possible board. And you said that, our Finnish colleague here said that the role of the chair is key, and I totally agree on that. But what we have learned is that we have started interviewing all board members, and what we experience is that often gives a different picture when just meeting with the chair and the CEO, because those two often work closer together and they may have a different view. I just want to say one more thing, and that's gender equality. In Norway we have this 40% requirement. And when I talk about this, most people laugh and think we're stupid. But what I want to say is that when that law was put in place, what we were forced to do is when you have 10% that time women in the board, you have to move to 40. You have to do some serious search work, and that forced us kind of to work systematically, and that has been, I think, in general, raised competence of the board of directors. So, thank you.
Yeah, please, Billy.
Can I just add some comments from, at the moment, I'm just finishing a process to appoint the chair of a new sort of development bank that we're working on for the SME sector. And again, it was my first appointment working. We have a small unit within government called OCPA. We have Office of a Commissioner for Public Appointments, where you have an independent overseer looking at the appointments. We use a professional search firm. We agree the job specification with that independent assessor. He sits with us in the interview process and then writes a report that goes up to the politician, because effectively the departments have to bless the appointments. But it puts a degree of rigor and good governance into the appointment process. We probably only do that for the chairman level, and then it's the nomination committee of the board who appoint. But initially I looked at it and thought, oh, here's a very onerous process, but I think the results of it have been quite helpful.
Okay, thank you. To me it seems that one of the prerequisites for good SOE management could be if we were able to establish clear goals. When I was getting acquainted with Shareholder Executive, what struck me was that there is a clear goal. We need to manage SOEs, I mean, in interest of the shareholders. So shareholders' return is the main thing that is guiding the management of SOEs. Here in Baltics, those goals are very often unclear, because from one side there is shareholder return, but from other side the society demands the services at the fraction of cost, and and this is the main thing on agenda. And this is also obviously presents a good opportunity for politicians, especially in pre-election period. If they can show that electricity prices don't go up, then there are no any problems with the SOE's management, for example. So how is it? What is your perspective on that, Tapani?
I think the markets or other actors have sort of a inherent mistrust that the state-owned companies have also other goals than for instance, financial companies than financial goals. And I think the separation, whether you have a commercial company or a company that has other goals, also has to be very clear. And the guidance that the owner gives to the board has to be very clear, and it has to be transparent, publicly stated. If there are other sort of hidden agendas to the board, and then there is a different agenda given outside to the community, that is a very short way to deal with things, because the SOEs has sort of a specific task to be more prudent than maybe some other company owned by some other parties than the state. So I think you should be very clear with your messages and the separations of the commercial and non-commercial companies. That's sort of a starting point for that discussion.
I just can add from the experience being representing the energy company. Of course, I would see this as a single biggest challenge. Actually, to agree with the shareholders regarding the goal, and to have it written somewhere in a very simple sentence, this is my dream. But then I could have just taken it and I could work on it and achieve it and be measured by that. What I mentioned regarding our structure, I think part of the purpose was also to be able to have a forum or the platform where you can discuss this goal. Of course, we cannot assume that one day we will wake up from where we are and suddenly someone will say, okay, now we have understood our position and we will give you the guidance. And of course, the company itself is also responsible for articulating that goal or helping the shareholder to achieve it or to go there. And having the broader forum within the supervisory board, as I explained, it helps exactly to have this discussion. And then this can lead us to the exact goal. And I'm just to wrap up, I'm really jealous about the goals that SOEs in Finland, Sweden, or UK have. I mean, this is so clear and so could be such a nice life.
Just to give two examples of how we've managed it in different SOEs, we recently set up the Green Investment Bank and we're working on this business bank. And there we talk about almost a double bottom line where we set a financial return target, but also a policy or a social goal target in terms of how much investment we want into that particular sector. But then once having set that broad strategy for the board, it is for the board to determine how best to reach the financial return and do the policy goal as well. The other thing, as we have privatized various former SOEs in the past, has been very important to set the right regulatory framework. You know, we've deregulated our energy industry for 20 years, but still we want to have a degree of certainty in terms of that will encourage investment. That's a big topic of debate in the moment in the UK. With 18 months to go to elections, we hear of price freezes in energy, which causes a little less certainty than the energy companies would want.
Yeah, Anders?
Just want to comment, and I totally agree with you. I mean, setting clear objectives and goals for each company. And you just add, in Norway, we have, in addition to concrete objectives for each company, we also have categorized them into commercial and non-commercial companies. There's about 50 of them that have been categorized. And firstly, it is to help the SOEs, but also to kind of create a policy which all politicians agree upon, and that makes it easier to govern these SOEs. And I think what we do is that, of course, the commercial SOEs, they have a market rate of return, but the companies with sectorial objectives, they are instruments used to solve a task, and it's not fair to say that they should have a market return. So we have other instruments that we monitor them on. Just wanted to add.
One of the views when discussing SOEs management is, or recommendation is saying that partial listing of SOEs on a stock exchange can considerably improve the governance of SOEs. So I would like to ask, what is your opinion and what are your thoughts on that? Anyone? Okay, Anders?
Well, what if you go back to 2000, we listed Statoil, which is the largest company in the Nordic region. and we listed Telenor, which is one of the world's largest telephone mobile operators now. Two things, absolutely. You got a better governance at that time, but you also enhance value. I mean, when you list something, you also better the governance, but you also get a market price. And I think in many cases, if you have a good case, you will increase your value. You won't decrease it. Mm-hmm. That's our experience, at least. Yes,
the same medicine has been proposed also in Estonia. I myself, I have been a bit hesitative because you probably had your homework done, meaning that the long-term goal was clear, the public goal was clear, what was expected. So I think that these things need to be clarified, and kind of homework needs to be made. And then, yes, the listing absolutely should add value. But basically the discussion which has been back in Tallinn has been is that we have so many things to improve. Why don't we list it, and then kind of the things will take care by themselves. And I have been hesitative on that because I think that that's going to be one big of mess. Is that up to the potential litigations, etc. Is that when you have already gone into the market and there is a broad-based ownership. And then suddenly somebody is starting to come back, is that, oh, actually we had this and another public expectations also for this company. So yeah, kind of my reaction on that is that yes, the listing absolutely enhances, but the basic things you still need to take care of before that.
Tapani?
I carry on from that. I think it's absolutely true that a listing of a company will improve the corporate governance of the company to be listed, but it's sort of a point of no return for the owner, and it really puts a great emphasis on good stewardship or ownership of that listed company, because then you have tens or thousands or tens of thousands other shareholders in the company, and you must behave in accordance with the sort of the market rules. And I'm sure that after many listings and after many years with listed companies, the state ownership departments improve with their behavior in a sense. But when the first listings are made, it's a learning curve also for the state ownership departments, and that is very crucial to realize that there is a point of no return, and you need to educate yourself also to the level of being an owner of a listed company.
I can only add that we have listed companies in our group, and I believe that to make this step, you need to understand exactly why you are doing this and how you're going to do this. Because sometimes I think that some decisions can be made just because it is fashionable, or it is some sort of opinion that you should be listed, and then in the end you end up with a fairly difficult situation. Okay. I think once you do it, you should know exactly why you want to do this, and I cannot agree more with Erkki that you have to be prepared. First homework and then listing. Okay,
coming from exchange, I wish the listing would become a fashion. So this is, and then we would deal the problems after that.
At point of time.
So, yeah, Patrick?
But just the comment was made earlier about the family business, and the person saying, I don't intend to die, so therefore I don't need to start the corporate governance. As we have been establishing these two new entities recently, we have set them the goal that they will comply with the combined code of corporate governance as if they were a public company, even though they're 100% private. Yeah. So we've set them up with strong corporate governance from the outset so that you don't have a transition. But again, we're starting with a new entity there, which is probably easier. So I think the listing will help, but the best thing is to ingrain it into the culture of the company from the outset.
Yeah. Thank you. Now we open the floor for questions. So please. Yeah.
Thank you very much for a very nice presentations, each of you. I would like to have a question related to the value of corporate governance. I do understand that for the listed companies, this is really the matter of expectations from the market, and the better controlled company is perceived and also reflects this on the market. What about unlisted companies? What about the small unlisted SOEs? Any of you, maybe you could comment, what is the marginal effect of the better corporate governance in the companies? What effect it can achieve? Is it 1%, 5%, 50%, etc.?
Yeah, Erkki?
Yes, thank you. Very relevant question. I mean, a bit dangerous to generalize that. Before saying any numbers at all, is that, I mean, where the improvements are coming from. Again, our experience, our very fresh experience is that small, very dedicated, mostly with the public goal enterprises are generally actually run very well. They know their goal. I mean, if you take like, I mean, for instance, there is a company who needs to keep these measurement etalons in Estonia or so. I mean, they are incorporated as a company, but they know exactly what they need to do. I mean, their board is dedicated and knows what to do. So kind of very limited room for improvement. But room gets significantly larger when you, by our experience, when you go towards to the more commercial entities. See is that the kind of currently maybe not best functioning corporate governance, what does it result? In our cases, broad-based overinvestments. So basically, there seems not to be, there is typically not a dividend policy in place. So there is an annual fight, is that, you know, how much the dividend is going to be taken or not taken. Companies making a strong attempt to pay as little as possible. Then basically excess resources, and then they go on and do investments with sub-returns. So we did some work on that, and that was actually fairly broad. I mean, we just figured is that, you know, for the luxury of having these companies, State of Estonia needs to put many good hundreds of millions euros more, not actually receiving the dividends, if they would follow these investment wishes what were there. So that was one. The second large area is, that's Estonian particularity, is that in our case, kind of controlling ministry is selecting half of the board members, and the Ministry of Finance is selecting another half. Is that there are two coalition partners, selecting half, another one is half. So what you have eventually is a kind of mini coalition fight in a boards of the companies. So again, they are becoming dysfunctional. And in some instances, it gets more ugly. So I'll stop here. What we taught, kind of looking and trying to quantify, is that, and we reached to the position is that we thought that within 3 years, with a hard and dedicated work and not cutting the corners, the EBITDA of the total portfolio in Estonia probably could be improved by 15 to 20%. And I mean, we would assign that to the corporate governance. Right or wrong, shall we ever see that? We don't know.
Yes, thank you. Any more, Patrick?
An image of the journey that we're on potentially with some of the interventions that we're making in the access to finance space for SMEs. Government in the UK has had various schemes that have been designed over the years, but they've been designed from a policy and a political perspective, and it's generally cost government the ability, you know, to run those schemes. Now we will still have some aided schemes in our portfolio in the business bank, but I do think we can and will be able to achieve that positive return across the portfolio if we put the right governance in and commercially manage those schemes, targeting the right policy. So we have the ambition to turn a negative into a positive in terms of return, which I think is pretty striking.
I just want to comment. I agree with my colleagues here. Have a focus to improve return by having good governance. Yes, if you look into having a dividend policy, making sure that you are getting the dividend that you should if you compare to peers. that you make sure that the company is not overcapitalized, that they're not comfortable, of course, having the right board and things like that. If you have that in place, then I think you will improve your governance, and it is important for the company to feel that they have an active owner and a professional owner because they will discipline them, and it will improve the governance and the performance, I think, at least if you look at commercial SOEs.
So we have time for a few more questions. Okay. So it seems that governance of SOEs is pretty clear, and now we just have to, we know what is the best practice and what is the guidance, so we can just now have to implement. So thank you very much, the panel members.